Hello, Geeks and Gamers. Matt Lemke here again with True Gamer Goggles at Con on the Cob 2013. We are this time sitting down at the table with Gary Triplett, who is a self-publisher and an artist. He does pretty good work. This is the first time I've seen him at Con on the Cob.
First time I've been to any con.
Oh, really? And you have two books.
In support of my book, I've been going to Con on the Cob, helping other people I know, and gaming and stuff like that.
And you have two books complete in your own world.
Yes, a book and a half. It's like a book and a companion book. The second book is written, but I'm waiting on art to be finished before I can actually publish it.
Book one is 3 threads, which we can probably get a... You did the art for this too, right?
I drew the cover, but I have a friend who painted it for me. But I drew all the internal art.
Yeah, you do mostly black and whites from what I can see.
Yes, and they are all characters that I illustrate in the book. So like here's my main character. And the chapter where she's all dressed up like that.
And we'll get some pictures of his prints. And where can they find you? You have Facebook, Twitter.
Yeah, I'm present on all sorts of places.
And is it?
I have a web page you can follow.
But is it GaryTriplett.com or
no? It's airforallen.com. But through that you can find links to where I sell the book on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles.
And I'm guessing Air for Allen is probably the name of the character?
That's the series title. This is a series of 5 books. So book 1 is titled 3 Threads. Book 2 is The Surface, which I have a mock-up copy of. This is just a proof.
Oh, excellent. So it's not... When will this be available to the public?
I'm hoping to get it out by December. The book is written. It's been edited. It's in a second editing right now with my editor. What I'm really waiting on is, and I'm very excited about this, the cover is going to be drawn by Larry Elmore, who's a very famous fantasy artist.
That's an understatement.
Yes, and it's like a boyhood dream of mine to have a cover that's any part of Larry Elmore.
But this sums Larry up. He no longer gets told what to do. He has asked what he would like to do for them. Mm-hmm. That's an accomplishment in the art world, is it not?
Definitely. So it's a privilege that Larry would even consider my work.
Well, you said you worked a lot with Larry.
I've worked with Larry. He's done a Kickstarter project, and he's working on that even now. And it's going to be incredible. It's like 336 pages. The print quality is awesome, and he's got a lot of stories that he's putting in there.
And I sadly did not buy in.
Well, you can go to conventions and buy it at list price. You don't get the Kickstarter discount.
Oh, he made a leather copy I wanted, I think.
And I got one of those. And fortunately, I live fairly close to Larry these days, and I had an opportunity to take a few of his drawing and art classes and things like that. And he got to know me. He knows I'm writing, and I ended up doing the editing on all of his writing, too. So I actually have credit in his book.
Which was the next phase of the interview. But, he also has the book and a half, or the half of a book, which is his vignettes.
Yes. The actual first book here encompasses basically 1/5 of the full project. I originally planned to write like 300,000 words, which is about the size of like a George R. R. Martin
Which is
book.
really insane.
It is. And I had a publisher for a little while... and what he convinced me to do is rather than write this big, long, elaborate thing and take one shot as an unknown author, he said in today's market, especially with Kindle, it's better to break it down into smaller parts. Get your name out there, start the ball rolling, get the second book out, second book sales drives sales of the first book, get the third book done, and just start the ball rolling. If I do it like this, I'm going to have basically 5 shots at introducing my world to you rather than just one big one that you're going to look at and go, I'm not taking that chance. So this is actually more of a...
And they're smaller investments that way, too.
Exactly, and if you get into the first book and you don't like, you've only invested, like $10 rather than 50.
Exactly, yeah. And this is based in the world that you created.
It's my own world, it's my own idea entirely. One of the things that I always liked about fantasy was the Dark Elves, but what I didn't like is that the TSR copyright drow treatment of Dark Elves just assumes stereotypically it's an entirely evil race except for a few heroes that come out to the surface. What I wanted to do is I wanted to create a world in which I could use elves and all of their political factions and explain how that came about and explore the relation well, that we as humans have with each other through fantasy. I wanted more of a literary approach rather than just pulp fiction. And my black-skinned, white-haired dark elves, I call them moon elves just to separate them from drow, are not inherently evil. They don't follow any kind of evil deity. They are simply on the losing end of a war and trying to get vengeance. So.
Ooh, vengeance. You don't see that too much anymore.
Well, it's a dangerous thing because it's very hard for readers to identify with people, characters, races, protagonists, whatever, who are simply hell-bent on revenge, essentially.
Yes, you're actually, it sounds like you're actually trying to make them the good guys in the book.
Well, they believe in their own cause.
Well, as do most people, yeah.
Exactly. And, so one of the things I really like about, and of course, being the author, I can write whatever I want. My protagonist is the equivalent of like a 16-year-old girl. She's coming of age in elf years. She's 180 years old. But in Dark Elf society, the females are dominant. So I call her a princess, but in reality she's more of a prince. In other words, she's not the one given in marriage to secure, interpolitical whatever. But she is the one that is in control of society. She's the one that has the most to gain. When the inevitable kick-out event happens and she goes up to the surface, which is the title of Book 2, she comes from this very limited world where she's king of the hill. In other words, like the big man on campus in high school. Suddenly going up to the surface world, the university of 50,000 people who don't know her.
Odd man out.
Not only is she a nobody, she is now a dark-skinned female on a light-skinned, male-dominated world trying to find a way to return to her own people in a triumphal way.
So if you want to get to the tension, you really have to get to Book 2.
Book 2 is where it really starts to flow. And again, one of the things I think that I had to deal with, a challenge for me, was taking this 300,000 word idea, breaking into smaller chunks and keeping each chunk on a good pace, a good development, and still maintain the flavor of the original story. So the entire first book is pretty much my character being introduced, seeing her world through her eyes, and a little mini climax. And then, of course, she gets into Book 2, and things start to happen, and there's a little mini climax, and each one of these is kind of getting slowly towards the main climax that I originally intended to be the end of a very long book.
What else makes your world unique other than the elves?
Well, I do not have a magic system, and I do not have a deity system. The elves in my world...
Wow. How absent.
Yes, and it's still, I still
so
call it fantasy.
Does it just feel dead?
I sure hope not.
Well, that's not how I meant. I meant, like, does it feel empty?
No, a lot of times, game systems require magic systems, things that can be quantified. And I think a lot of fantasy is geared towards whatever game system they are in support of or trying to promote. As a writer of my own world, I'm free to do anything I like. So, similar to a George Martin. He created his entire world of Westeros, and he's free to do anything he wants. There's games that are now based on it, but he wasn't doing it in support of a game. As opposed to, if I were writing in the Forgotten Realms, I have to integrate with an already established system of games and other novels and deities and things like that.
Which isn't easy.
Not easy at all, and it's very confining. I have the freedom to do my own thing. So the elves of my world have essentially psionics, mental abilities, although they don't really call it that. They just focus cellular energy and kind of shape it into what we would consider magical effects. The humans on the planet do not have that ability. It's not in the genetics. The dwarves on this planet do not have that. It's not in their genetics. So it is a function unique to the elves of my world. It makes them very potent opponents. If I did eventually, I have an idea, I would like to make a game out of this someday, but I do not have any possibility of equality between the races. A single elf would never be challenged by a single human. Now, you throw 3 humans at him, and it might be an interesting fight. You throw 5 humans at him, and they might touch the elf.
So even though they're dainty, they're like trolls.
Well, the thing that I always thought, it's like, and I've had some opportunities to watch trained fencers and some LARPers and stuff like that, and I've seen the noobs with their foam swords. Basically, a human who's been handling a sword for 3 months, going against a skilled veteran fighter who's been fighting dwarves for 250 years, does not stand a chance. And then you give that veteran 250-year trained fighter the ability to move faster than light, just about. They can focus and allow their nervous system to receive brain signals at multiples of a resting rate. So for them, time seems to slow down, and they are moving normally in that frame. Anybody outside of them, is still moving normal, but they see a blur of white and they're cut in half, and it's like, darn.
That's always been a drawback for me with the elves in just about any game system. They're so much older, yet they start with the same skill sets.
And that's one of the things that I really like to explore. My elves have lifespans of 2,000 or 3,000 years. And
oh my gosh.
This vignettes, these are just a short series of little backstories, and I do a lot of my own art, all of my own art. So when I introduce a character, and I've reproduced the art in these books, but this is a little short story that began 877 years before the events of the main story. My main character.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting approach.
And you can see, and this is the same person who exists in here. Now, of course, he's the
Younger.
equivalent of a 20-year-old, and later in the book, he's the equivalent of a 35-year-old, even though a millennium has passed in between.
That was pretty smart. And now, do you have these available as these two as ebooks?
This one is available on as a Kindle version. This one I am in the process of converting to Kindle, but I am very concerned with quality, is the best way to put it. So the automatic conversion processes will give you raw HTML, and sometimes the conversion is not too good, very sloppy.
Okay.
So,
well, I haven't worked with it yet, but I have received some PDFs to review, and sometimes the art just doesn't show up.
Yes. Yep. So I'm very careful, very cautious to make sure all the links are correct, clean up the code, do what I know I can do.
Is that how they work? I didn't know that.
You can make it work. It's just...
I didn't realize that they were links, like the art and stuff were links.
Sure. The same as you'd set up a web page. I mean, for Kindle at least. Now, I don't know how to do the EPUBs yet.
Well, see, mine is through Amazon, and I don't use the Kindle, but it's a Kindle format. I use it on my tablet. Okay. So that might be why I don't see the pictures on some other things. It just might be a type of, it's this Android versus this language and whatever.
And I'm sure there's different approaches to it. It's just, I do have a master's in IT, so I know a little bit about computers, and I do want to make sure that the underlying code is good and eliminates problems. I
didn't even know they had a master's in IT. I thought they were all 18-month degrees now.
Yeah.
So he's got a real day job, a real day job.
Used to. I used my real day job to pay off all my debt and save up enough money that I can now have my midlife crisis, which is writing the fantasy novel I've always wanted to write. So I've been unemployed for 2 years, just living on my own savings, in pursuit of the dream. I'm living my dream.
At least you could say you did it.
Yes, I can. Well, and that's one of the things a lot of people have said. It's like, if I'm one of those full brain kind of people. In other words, I've got an analytical side, and I've got a creative side. When I'm doing computer programming, which I did for a decade, the creative side of me was always struggling for release. But I'd just be working all day, and I'd be tired, and I'd come home and watch TV, and I was just wasting years. After that, I spent a decade in Korea teaching at a university as a professor of English. And that was actually an eye-opening experience for me. One of the things that really inspired some of the story writing here, too.
And some of the art.
Yes, I have a very Asian influence.
A couple of his faces are very Korean.
Yes, I have a Korean model that I've used. I have a Japanese influence in the costuming. I wanted to put elves in kimono. The way I did that is, my plan is...
Interesting.
It's essentially its own little pocket system. Earth, in its future, our future history, started sending out colony ships as it was starting to become a large galactic power. There was a group of ethnic Japanese who decided they wanted to go colonize some lost planet and revive shogunate Japan. And their colony ship disappeared. Nobody ever knew what happened to them. The human empire very rapidly expanded, and like a swarm of locusts consumed planet after planet. I kind of modeled them on a Roman idea that it was so corrupt at its core that it collapsed in on itself. During that civil war, a lot of the races that they had conquered and enslaved rose up against them, including the Ferelden, who are my elves, and overthrew them. And in order to get rid of humans and just not ever deal with that again, went planet to planet. Genocide just wiped out all humans. So they thought. Later, and closer to the history of this, a Ferelden scout ship fell through the wormhole, found this planet. The 12 survivors crawled out, and guess what? It's a planet full of humans. So they are survivors, basically alien survivors of shipwreck. And, that's one of the things, another thing I liked. I love all the elven factions. And it's generally assumed all the way through standard fantasy fiction that the elven factions just exist, but we never found out how.
Right.
So I wanted to actually find a way, and I'm not calling it revisionism, it's just my own little planet, and I can, write what I want, I suppose. But I like the idea of explaining why there are differences, even among a few survivors of shipwreck. And basically, it's like they had fought a long, bloody, genocidal war with humans. Now they're crashed on a planet trying to survive, and it's filled with humans. What do? Some of the elves said, well, we can survive in places humans can't. Let's just go off to the North Pole and make presents for Santa Claus, and they'll never find us. Not literally that, but, they become the outsiders.
It's an analogy.
Yeah, they're the ones that just hide away and, hope nobody will ever find them, the pacifists. There are some elves that say, okay, look, we've got 100 elves. There's probably 10,000 humans now. In 200 years, we will birth 50, how many did I say, 100? We'll probably birth 10 children. We'll have 110. In 200 years, 10,000 humans will become 1 million. And we will lose. So we must fight them now. They become the wild elves. Basically, they try to kill humans on sight. The strongest faction are the sun elves, the ones that flower children's like, let's educate them and we can all live in peace and harmony together. That always works.
Woodstock.
And then there's the elves that are the followers of Queen Ascarna. And basically her idea is, let's work together, figure out the genetics, and make a race of essentially half human, half Ferelden. And because now we are all one people with longer lifespans, they will be better able to appreciate our style, we will be better able to appreciate their lifestyles, and it's one people, there's not going to be any trouble. The Sun Elves, of course, thought that was abomination, and they fought a civil war, chased those people underground, where they are bombarded by radiation, their skin turns black, and we now have my version of Dark Elves. And so the factions are formed, and my story begins.
Sounds like your story's got a lot to go to, though. And a lot of other avenues it can go. So when you're done with 3,000 words, you got another 20.
Yes. Well, it has a rich history, and that's one of the reasons, this actually started...
That's a really good idea. I like that a lot.
This started as just a series of writing exercises, really, to explore the characters, because I am very limited point of view when I write. I really like, if you know the style of George Martin as he writes, not the story, but his writing style. He has what I call an intimate third-person point of view. So it's like a camera's floating on one person's head through the course of a chapter, and you only know what that person sees. You are not floating above in some godlike mode.
Yeah, and I know that mode.
Yeah, and
I kind of do that.
And then what Martin will do is his camera kind of sinks into the person's head for a little bit, and you'll get first-person thought perspective, intimate to that person, where he's like talking to himself, but of course you read it too. I love that, and I use that style. What I don't like about what Martin has done is he has created such a plethora of things that you can no longer identify with any particular protagonist, any particular plot line. It's just a collection of people surviving in a war-torn world, which obviously he's been very successful with, and I applaud his work, but I need to have
you want more
structure.
Character. You want more character.
I keep with a very select group of characters. It's more of a party adventure.
I'm kind of going through that whole thing in my own writing area now. As plot versus character.
Yes, you find what you like and you pursue it, and that's the important thing to writing.
Well, I never really gave it any thought before the last year or two, and I think I kind of lean towards you can have a really good plot, but without a good character, your plot probably won't amount to much more.
Yes. You can have a plot-driven story, you can have a milieu-driven story.
I think you need a balance.
Right.
I'm not sure one... I kind of think character's probably a little bit more important.
If you don't have a compelling character, you're not going to...
You're not going to have a...
You're not going to bring a character or a reader into your...
Exactly. You're not going to... You won't build that following. I think it's kind of like role-playing.
Exactly.
I have learned over the last, I don't know, 20 years of role-playing that if you really get into playing a character, you eventually become a brother or a sister to that character, and when it dies, you actually kind of feel it. And I know that sounds sick and twisted, but you spend a lot of time developing these personalities. You really do know these people on an intimate level.
Well, and that is our nature as humans. We do like forming relationships. We are a social creature. I think a lot of the angst and anger that occurred to the readers of Martin's works first, and of course the watchers of the TV series after, is that there's an unwritten contract between a writer and his audience. In other words, the writer's saying, you can trust me with your time to tell you a compelling story. And it begins with advertising. You know, the opening parts of the books, what's called a hook, is essentially a form of advertising. Martin advertised a very character-centric, character-driven story, a very intimate family portrait with the Starks. And you're thinking, these are good people. These are protagonists. I will invest in them and follow them. And a big bad thing happens. And you are thinking, well, now the children are going to find their revenge. We are going to follow them. And now the children are dead or scattered or broken. And the story starts to go over here and go over here. And what that unwritten contract that has then been broken is that we are not in a character story. We are in what's called a milieu. George Martin is writing milieu. It is about the throne, it is about the ice wall, it is about the politics of his land. The characters, although very well written, are incidental. Any single one of them, don't invest in any of them, basically. So people who bought into the book thinking they're going to follow a protagonist and a character, a very well-written character, are betrayed. And that's where I think a lot of that anger came from.
Yeah, I can see that.
So, the other writer I really liked was Robert Jordan. Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series.
So what do you think of, Brandon
Sanderson.
Sanderson. Yeah, I wanted to say Brendan David, but it's the wrong guy.
Well, the problem with me, I'd already given up on the series long before Robert Jordan died.
But he had other stuff you liked.
Of Sanderson's?
Or Robert Jordan.
Well, Robert Jordan, basically what happened, I think, with him is he started with like a 5-book series, and the publisher said, this is going great, can you make it 7? He's like, sure. And can you make it 9? Can you make it 12? And he's like, sure. And then he dies. Especially by the time it got to book 7, book 8, book 9, I was just, and again, there's that unwritten contract with the readers. It's like, I'm willing to invest with the author I'm following only so far as they are fulfilling my expectation of what they told me they're going to do. It's basically like signing a contract, really. It's like, I'm going to give you this kind of a story, and you agree to follow that to the point where you believe that that contract is going to be fulfilled. If I give you this bill of goods and start doing this over here, you start to think, well, I can't trust this guy any further, and that's kind of what happened. So, yeah, I understand the series has been finished, and I lost interest long before that. But what I did like about Jordan's writing style is what I call ensemble characterization. The idea being that when a group of his characters are together, and he is very tight in one person's head in the course of a chapter, I think that's extremely important. But, for example, he will be in Rand's point of view. And while Rand is the point of view character and thinking about Perrin and thinking about Mad, his best friends, he's like, well, Perrin's very thoughtful and Mad is very good with the girls. And you understand who Perrin and Mad are through Rand's perspective. In a later chapter, he will then turn around and you'll be in Perrin's head. And Perrin will be like, well, I'm very slow-witted because I'm cautious and deliberate in my thinking. I wish I was more like Rand, who's so confident in his decisions, and more like Matt, who's able to do impulsive things. And then later you get into Matt's perspective, and Matt will judge the other characters. And I love that you can learn about the different characters through different people's perceptions of them. That's another style I like to emulate. So those are the two authors that I drew the most influence from. Not in their storytelling, but in how they told the story.
And you've drawn influence in art from Larry, and probably a few others, I would imagine.
Well, Larry Elmore was my defining influence all through my history. I did appreciate Parkinson's colors. He had a very moody palette, I would call it. When Parkinson would choose his colors, he usually had a fairly limited range, but very realistic, and really portrayed the feeling through that. But like when Larry Elmore would do something, Larry had what I call a very optimistic palette. He would always choose colors that were vibrant, bright, exciting.
Yes, he always has.
And, I mean, even think of his iconic
Dragonlance.
Red Dragon.
Yep.
Yeah, the Dragonlance, or even the Red Dragon, the box cover for the old basic set. I mean, you've got this...
I didn't know he did that.
Yeah, that's...
There's no woman on it.
I know, but there's a big Larry Dragon.
Yeah.
There's this big red... I mean, think of primary colors. Red, blue, yellow.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the big red dragon head. You've got the little blue fighter just charging willy-nilly right at this dragon.
And a whole bunch of gold.
Fighting over a big yellow pile of gold. Big triangle, primary colors. It's perfect. But there's no angst. There's no moodiness. That fighter's not sitting there like, well, maybe that dragon doesn't deserve to die because he's actually a good dragon, not a bad dragon. Maybe this gold could be a bit... No, he's just got a sword and he's going to go kill the dragon. And that's the optimism all of Larry's works, I think, portray. Just that. Maybe we're going to be successful, maybe we're going to die, but I'm going to do 100% with my sword, and that's Dungeons & Dragons in my mind. So I always
pretty
admire.
effective.
And of course, Larry's an extraordinary artist. So.
Oh yes.
When he frames the picture and lays it out, and he's mastered perspective.
I drool at his booth every year. Drool is the right word.
Yeah, and so one of the greatest opportunities in my life, of course, is attending his drawing. And
I want to send my wife.
Send your wife?
To his class.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And
if I ever make enough money.
Oh, there's that. And one of the things I've always said is, like, let's say you're a 10, and you're trying to learn a particular thing, and you find a teacher who's a 50. Of course, you're going to shoot to 20, 25, and then you have to start grinding to learn what's left. But if you're 10 and you find a 100, and I had the opportunity to do that with Larry, you're going to shoot to 50, 60 before you have to start grinding, because he's just got so much to teach you.
Right.
And when Larry talks about art, he knows it so intimately. He's lived it for 40 years, and you feel that. But he'll say something, and it's like the clouds roll back, the sun shines down, the angels are singing. It's like, oh, and things click and connect.
Clear.
So it was truly an amazing opportunity, and I think my art does show that.
3 other people that have gone to his class, and I can see the influence. It's just amazing. It's like I'm getting to a point where I walk around. Oh, you took Larry's art class. How do you know? I go, I can see it in that picture. You're like, yeah, that was actually the one I did at his class.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So for me, as you know, my lifetime dream was always to have a Larry Elmore cover on my fantasy book. And I also wanted to have internal illustrations, but I always thought it was going to have to be someone else because my drawing wasn't that good. When I got to attend Larry's class and I found out how to really draw and how to see things, that's another important thing. A lot of people will, I want to use see with a capital S, different than just normal sight. A lot of people will take in images and not process them. It's just kind of like, oh, it's a red carpet and it's a blue drapery and it's a white wall. Other people will see it and they will see the shades and the patterns and how the light's striking it, and that red carpet is actually made up of warp and a weave, and there's patterns inside the patterns, and there's detail on everything. And those are the people who can then produce that in their art. So a lot of it is also training yourself to see the detail. You can't make detail if you can't see it.
Correct. Which is why I'll probably never be an artist.
Some people do it better than others, for sure.
I can do some stuff, but I'm really good at when I start drawing 3D, I'm real good at twisting. So if I made a twisted, warped world, I'd be okay. Like I used to draw cars in school. You know, they were futuristic cars because I didn't like regular cars. So they were like hover cars and stuff like that. So
Sure.
I draw this thing that makes it look like an old school speed racer type of car, but it was square instead of curved because that's where my art level was at. So you get to the hood, and you'd have the hood, and you'd have one corner. This line's really good; it comes back here, but this line's up here, so now the hood's kind of curved, and I was just real bad at that depth perception thing.
Yeah, everybody has their talents, everybody has their interests.
But I could draw Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles!
Excellent. That's something I could never do.
I bought his comic book on how to draw him.
Ah, sweet.
That was a good couple of years, I guess. It was interesting. That's two-dimensional, sort of.
Yeah.
But what else you want to share?
I don't know. I think the thing that I've accomplished here, and maybe it's a little presumptuous, I suppose, but I don't like pulp fiction. Not the movie, but I'm meaning fiction that's just pumped out to be entertaining, to be pulp. And I think a lot of TV goes that way. I think a lot of movies go that way. There's very little depth to it. It's all bang and flash
there's a
and
lot
excitement.
of stuff that's no depth anymore.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to create literature that's going to last through the ages. Although if it does, that would be awesome. But I do want
to... So no Beowulf.
No, but I do want to follow certain accepted standards of, again, that unwritten contract between the author and the writer, or the author and the reader. And I think I do understand enough about it to follow the rules well. And basically what it is I'm not going to betray your trust in me to change what I'm telling you I'm doing. What I think I'm addressing, I'm looking at, for example, stereotypes, morality, racial issues, and gender stereotyping through the eyes of a fantasy character. My main protagonist is the equivalent of like a 16-year-old girl. However, in Dark Elf Society, of course, the females are dominant, so she's actually, I call her a princess, but she's actually a prince. She's not the one given in marriage, she's the one in control of society. She's the big man on campus. When she goes out in the world and is judged by her skin and her gender, and if we've made a connection with her, we are now seeing our own world, the world of the surface with all of our bright colors, through the eyes of somebody experiencing it for the first time as an alien world.
Right.
And I'm kind of challenging you to look at your own perceptions, your own stereotypes, and realize what they are. And if that makes it literature, great. If that makes me presumptuous, probably.
I don't think that would be presumptuous. I mean, if that's your goal to try and write something to see if you can do it, that's more like you taking on a personal challenge. Like, I'm working on a story where I'm trying to have the same scene happen twice in the book, but you don't know it's the same scene until the end of the first time you read it.
That's pretty cool.
I'm hoping I can do it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really kind of worried. I believe I can do it, but I'm not sure if I can be subtle enough.
Well, and that's another thing too, and it really helps. Like, I've written hundreds of short stories before I ever put them into a large plot, coherent novel. There are little writing techniques and things, but one of the things you learn the more you write is how much the reader picks up.
Yes.
And one of the things I found, and I hope I won't spoil any part of my story, but in one of my preludes, I tell you almost directly a major part of the plot. But because it's so early in the book, the reader does not have the foundation to appreciate what information they just received. As the story, and that it becomes a little seed that just sinks down somewhere in the subconscious. And as they are reading into the later chapters and little hints come up, those hints are very familiar and accessible to them because it's all pointing back to that little thing they already know and don't even realize.
Right.
I love those little things like that. The other thing I'm very cautious about is, like in movies, you have very limited screen time. Do not do or show anything that does not have meaning or purpose. In other words, if you see a gun in a movie, and again, that goes back to that unwritten contract idea. If you show a gun in a movie, it must go off. That's an analogy. If a watcher notices that, and through the entire movie they got that little question in the back of their mind: why is the gun in the drawer? Why is the gun in the drawer? Why is the gun in the drawer? And things happen, and you expect the character's going to reach for the gun in the drawer because it's there. You know it's there. There's a reason they showed it. It's there. You know it. And through the entire movie, they never use the gun. At the end of the movie, you feel betrayed. It's like, why did they make me waste my time knowing there's a gun there and never use it? So even in plotting, crafting a story, you have to be very concise, give them what they need to know, form questions in their heads, and answer them. Not directly, not right away, maybe draw it out, and as you're answering the question, make it in such a way that it forms 3 more questions. That's how you draw them into the story, into the next book. There is a crafting art to writing, I think, and one of the big advantages and also a big challenge to writers these days. The advantage is that publishing is very accessible through, for example, CreateSpace, like I have self-published. And Amazon gives you a great platform to put anything you want out there relatively cheaply. The disadvantage, of course, is that there is a great quantity of relatively cheap fiction available.
Next to no marketing.
Yes, you have to do all the work yourself. So,
and that's hard.
Well, but, then there's people like you who have blogs and you help artists promote themselves, talk about themselves, help readers identify things that they might enjoy and give it a chance. You help us stick out of the ocean just a little bit, and that's greatly appreciated.
Every little bit helps.
Definitely.
Every little bit helps.
And word of mouth helps. The best thing you can do for an indie author, and this is universally true if it's me or anybody, if you like a book, tell people you like it.
That's true.
Find your friends who have similar interests, tell them. Go on Amazon.com, find the book, go on Goodreads, write a review. It doesn't have to be elaborate. You could even say, it was good, W-Z-G-U-D, whatever. Put 5 stars and say, it was a good read, I really enjoyed it. And you are doing that person an enormous favor. Because people, I can do all the advertising I want, I can set up at conventions, I can drive people to my website.
It's not as powerful.
No, I can drive them to Amazon.com, and if somebody finally gets to my page through all that effort, and they look and nobody likes the book, they're gone, and they will never come back. But if I spend all of my effort, I get them to the Amazon page, and they look, and it's got 4.7 stars after 23 reviews, they're like, that might actually be something I can look at. A lot of people seem to like it. So, there is a lot of interactivity, and that is an advantage of the modern market, the social media. You can connect with your authors, people that you like. You can help support them. You may not think it's much, but you can't believe how helpful
it goes a long way when you're starving.
It goes a long, long way.
And artists starve. So do writers. There's not a whole lot of money.
Well, and another thing you may not realize, too, people who might be listening in, artists of any nature crave feedback. Writers,
this is true, yeah.
Authors.
Writers are a little bit picky about it sometimes, but...
Well, it depends if it's good feedback. If you're going out in a public forum, yeah.
Well, even from an editor, it's sometimes I've heard stories. He corrected a sentence. It's his job.
Yes. Well, and then I guess you get into the arrogance of whether or not that sentence needed to be corrected, because there are opinions, nobody's perfect. But,
and editing is kind of an opinion.
In a way, sure.
I mean,
there are fundamentals. If a word's misspelled, yes, you fix it. But, if a word is specifically chosen to be in a space in a sentence, either for timing or whatever, and the editor removes it, then yes, you may have an issue. It's like, but I have it there for a reason, It's amazing sometimes you can try justifying, and then they'll dig their heels in because they think they're right. And
that's something I never really realized before, too. You actually have to have a relationship with your editor to really
that's very
succeed.
Necessary,
yeah.
Yes.
Whereas I've always looked at editors as they're just a person who reads your book and sends it back with comments type of thing.
Well,
and I think if you do that as a writer, you're probably hurting yourself.
There are different styles of editing, and I've run into several different types. The editor on my book is actually a lady I've known for quite some time. And she is very detailed, and very importantly, she lets me keep my style. Basically, what she looks for are things that strike her as awkward, and then she will ask me about them, what I intended, and how effective they were. In fact, there are a couple of places coming up in my second book where an entire beginning of a chapter was completely written from another character's point of view simply because it was awkward how I'd first done it. And when you have that kind of relationship where your editor is reading not only on the punctuation and grammar level, but also on the story, plot, intent level, that is invaluable. But when I first got this ready and I approached a small publisher, and he put his own editor on it, this is one of those things where I submit my manuscript as well as I could do it, and 6 months later, and it took that long,
Wow.
it came back in an email with basically things changed and no comments.
Oh.
And I had
awful.
to go through my own book, word for word, and find out what was changed with no reason why. And unfortunately, my experience wasn't so great because a lot of the changes were not only unnecessary but wrong. And it was because she was following a style guide which was inappropriate for fantasy fiction. And I don't want to go into all sorts of details, but then I had to work with the publisher I was working with at that time to try to get my manuscript back to an acceptable level. And he was very gracious and allowed me to do that. But where I eventually came to loggerheads with my, of course, ex-publisher, since I'm self-published, is that his perspective was quantity over quality. He wanted to get the book out, he wanted to get it accessible, and he didn't really care what the book was. It was just going to be out. And he was working on 5 books at the same time, and they were all equally allocated resources and time, which is fine. And from his perspective, that's how he runs his business. But for me, after all the effort I put into my drawing, all the effort I put into crafting my story, I wanted to make sure it was presented well. What we more or less ended up coming to loggerheads about was that he created a file which had a small file size. The internal art, and he agreed the internal art was good and it should be in the book, but he had reduced the file sizes down to essentially about 72 dpi, which is about half the quality of a photocopy. So the pictures looked pixelated.
Yeah, and since it was your own art, there's no way you could have stood for that.
No, and so I went back to him and I said, look, I know this can be printed well. I have 600 dpi images. Yes, they are large file sizes. The printer can handle that and it will look great, but we need to keep that resolution. And he says, look, I don't have the time. Either we go with what I did or we're not going. And I said, well, the choice at that point was he could put me in front of 1,000 people with a book I hated, or I self-publish, I get the book I want, and I get it in front of 100
And you're happy.
I am delighted with the quality of work that comes out of CreateSpace. I mean, for a service which is part of a huge conglomeration, I could care less about what is going out there. The quality that they give you is just outstanding.
So, okay, are you going to come up to Origins this year?
I would like to. I'm not sure what my schedule is next year because I've been 2 years unemployed, like I said, and the money's starting to run out. So
Come up as a Larry lackey.
I tried that too. Yeah, actually, a couple of years ago, I did help Larry in his booth, and that was really exciting. Very possibly. I'd like to go to Origins. I'd like to go to Gen Con. I'd like to go to Dragon Con. But of course, these things are scheduled out years in advance, and I'm a newcomer
Right.
to the scene. So I can put in my application.
Yeah, Gen Con and Dragon Con are very tough to get into.
Yeah.
Origins isn't so as challenging.
Okay. Well, definitely something to look into.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend getting in, like an exhibitor's booth. But
Yeah, that's pricey too.
well, that's why I said maybe come up as a Larry lackey, share a little bit of space with Larry. There's also, they have the library at Origins, and I have no idea what the pricing, or if there's any pricing, if they just bring the authors in, on how that works. I don't even know who runs it at Origins. I need to do some research on that.
That's a good idea. Maybe I'll look into
And
that.
there's, you might want to look into the Writer's Symposium for Gen Con. I don't know. Well, I'm going to find out what their requirements are because I'm planning on being published by the end, before Gen Con.
Okay.
And actually, I want to join the symposium because they've been so influential in getting me to a point where I want to get published.
Cool. That's good advice. I'll have to look
And
into that.
the symposium's really big. There's like 60 or 70 authors, editors,
Yeah.
a lot of people to mingle with. Mike Stackpole's one of them. I'm not sure. I don't know how much fantasy reading you've done. And
I've read a lot of the classics.
Mike Stackpole wrote some of the original Shadowrun stuff. He's written a lot of BattleTech stuff.
Right.
And then he's had like 14 bestsellers. So
Well, I spent a decade in Korea, like I said, and I was
yeah, so you missed a good bit of what
I've
he's
been
written.
completely disconnected from the entire world from 1999 to about 2010.
Effectively, yes.
So, and as soon as I came out of Korea, the first thing I do is I ensconced myself in a 190-year-old building and started writing. So I'm totally disconnected. But the old like the Dragonlance trilogies, a lot of the old TSR Forgotten Realms books. I read a lot of those. Of course, my foundation is Tolkien. When I was in high school, I read the Lord of the Rings, which is a very good milieu book. But for example, you could completely swap Merrin Peregrine and Meriadoc, and lose nothing. In fact, you could even take, in Tolkien's writings, you could even take Gimli and Legolas, switch their characters, switch the names every time you read them, and there would be no difference. They don't have distinct personalities.
It's true.
His point, and that whole party that he created was basically like, I intend to show you my world one city at a time with a representative from each city, in the party. So you have, one elf, one human, one dwarf, one, and 4 hobbits, of course.
Yeah.
His focus was the world, and it's a great milieu story, and it's the way fantasy started. So.
Effectively, yes. But on that note, it's time to say goodbye. See you guys next year. Well, you'll see me a lot sooner than that, I hope. I hope I didn't bore you that much. And thank you, Gary.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate the time.
Appreciate it, Matt.